Welcome. I'm Rose Aguilar, and this is Your Call's special series, The Authoritarian Playbook. Today, we are discussing how the Trump administration is deploying ICE agents across U.S. cities and building what experts describe as a national paramilitary police force. Trump campaigned on a promise to deport 20 million undocumented immigrants. The Department of Homeland Security says 2 million undocumented people have been deported or have self-deported since January 20th. Over 59,000 people are currently in ICE detention in the United States. Non-public data from ICE indicate that the government is primarily detaining individuals with no criminal convictions of any kind, according to the Cato Institute. They got their hands on ICE data. It shows 65% of people taken by ICE had no convictions. That is 65% of people with no convictions, and 93% had no violent convictions. We're going to play clips from two recent raids. On September 30th, in the middle of the night, hundreds of armed agents wearing masks raided a 5-story apartment building in Chicago's South Side. They were backed up by helicopters, smoke grenades, and unmarked riot trucks. Agents repelled from Black Hawk helicopters. They kicked down doors, woke up residents, and used zip ties to restrain adults and children. They held some people outside and dragged others into vans. Undocumented people and U.S. citizens were detained, according to reports. 37 people were arrested. ICE said they were pursuing gang members. Here is a clip from ABC 7 Chicago.
It was scary because I've never had a gun put in my face.
Neighbors like Ebony Watson says they ducked for cover as they heard several flashbangs go off.
They was terrified. The kids was crying. People was screaming. They looked very distraught. I was out there crying when I seen the little girl come around the corner. Because they was bringing the kids out, too. Had them zip tied to each other. One of them literally laughed. He was standing right here. He said, them kids.
Thanks to that clip from ABC 7 Chicago. And then on September 9th, ICE agents slammed 79-year-old Rafi Shuhed to the ground at his Valley Car Wash in Van Nuys, California. He has filed a $50 million lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security. Here's a clip from Fox 11 Los Angeles.
You F with ICE. You do not F with ICE. You do not F with ICE. That's all they learn. I guess that's all the English they knew.
That's 79-year-old Rafi Shuhed describing what he says happened September 9th when federal agents descended on his Valley Car Wash to arrest workers suspected of being in the U.S. illegally.
I was begging him. I have a heart condition.
Surveillance video shows agents first approaching the elderly man inside of his business 2 weeks ago. He says he attempted to ask them what they needed and pleaded with them to allow his workers to retrieve their papers proving they had a right to work in the U.S. Instead, he was thrown to the ground.
Rafi Shuhed is a U.S. citizen. He said he suffered multiple broken ribs, damage to his brain from being slammed headfirst to the ground. He says he was arrested and detained for 10 hours without medical attention. This is a 79-year-old man. Yesterday, there was an ICE raid on Canal Street in Manhattan. That's where vendors sell things like fake bags and other goods. There are videos online of New Yorkers yelling at agents to get out of their city. Federal agents detained several people, according to reports. 2 weeks ago, Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff, a Trump supporter, told the New York Times that he thought National Guard troops should be deployed to San Francisco. He's now walking that back after receiving widespread criticism. On Monday, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says ICE is coming to San Francisco.
We're going into San Francisco at the direction of the president as well.
At a Florida press conference, the U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security doubled down on the National Guard presence in Chicago and Portland and indicated San Francisco is next, following comments from President Trump on Fox News Sunday.
We're going to make it great. We're going to make it great. It'll be great. Again, San Francisco is a great city. It won't be great if it keeps going like this. We're going to go to San Francisco. The difference is I think they want us in San Francisco.
Attorney General Rob Bonta responded to those threats saying, we're ready to be in court in hours, if not minutes, if the National Guard is deployed to San Francisco.
And I saw that the district attorney in San Francisco indicated that if these ICE agents violate the law in San Francisco, as they have in Chicago, she intends to prosecute them, and she should.
There is no lawful basis to deploy the National Guard to San Francisco. Period. Full stop. End of story. So what can we do? We'll see him in court, as we always have. When he wrongfully and unlawfully deployed troops to L.A., we saw him in court. We got 2 orders, blocking, one, the federalization, and 2, the actions on the ground that violated the Posse Comitatus Act. We'll do that again. Immediately. We're ready. We see this coming.
Thanks to ABC7 for that clip. Meantime, ICE is building one of the most powerful surveillance networks in the country, tracking people's movements and online activity through data from private companies, social media, and government agencies, often without people's knowledge or a warrant. Today, we are going to discuss how all of this is reshaping law enforcement, eroding civil rights, and redefining the limits of presidential power. We'll also talk about how communities are responding and fighting back. We're joined by 3 guests. Catherine Seitz is legal director for the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area and former legal director at Legal Services for Children and regional immigration coordinator for Bay Area Legal Aid. Hi, Catherine. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Matthew Guaraglia is Senior Policy Analyst at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, where he focuses on government surveillance. Matthew Guaraglia is author of Police and the Empire City, a book about how fear of immigrant crime created modern police technology. He's also co-author of the forthcoming book, The Church Committee Report, Revelations from the Bombshell 1970s Investigation into the National Security State. Hi, Matthew. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, glad I could contribute.
Thank you. Noreen Shaw is Director of Government Affairs in the Equality Division at the American Civil Liberties Union. She leads their immigration policy and advocacy work. Noreen is a human rights lawyer with history as an advocate, researcher, and campaigner. She previously served as Senior Director of Campaigns at the U.S. section at Amnesty International and Acting Director of Columbia Law School's Human Rights Clinic. Hi, Noreen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Noreen, I want to start off with you. You work with the ACLU, and I was up late last night watching videos of so many ICE raids. I mean, people are being pulled from the streets. They're being thrown into unmarked vans. I saw a pregnant woman who was videotaping an arrest. She's pregnant, and an ICE agent put a gun in her face. Family members are screaming because they have no idea where their loved ones are being taken. Noreen, how is this legal?
It's not legal. And we see the Trump administration running roughshod over our rights, attempting to act with impunity every day. ICE is an agency that is rule-bound. It is subject to congressional oversight. All of us have rights, our constitutional rights, that are being trampled upon. And the important thing to know is that whatever the administration claims, people still have those civil rights. It doesn't matter if it's ICE or the National Guard or your local law enforcement agency. We have rights, due process rights, Fourth Amendment rights, and they remain in place. And it doesn't matter if the Trump administration tries to write itself a blank check to do this. We still have those rights. And of course, the ACLU and our partners all over the country are in court, filing lawsuits, seeking and many times getting injunctions against these horrific tactics. And we continue to be in active litigation to push back on these rights violations and prevent them. And we are also working with state and local leaders around the country to get protections for our communities to make sure that local governments take no part in these rights violations.
So, Matthew, if this is not legal, how is it continuing? And the Trump administration is threatening to carry out similar ICE raids now in San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's continuing just because nobody can stop it because they have the infrastructure and they have people who are following orders, and in some cases they've seemed willing to ignore court orders. So it's continuing, even though it is flagrantly unlawful, just because our structure was not designed to put brakes and checks on somebody who just ignores the rules.
And because it's so hard to keep up with everything, I just want to read a couple of headlines. So The Guardian had an investigation last month, Trump's deportation hub inside the black hole where immigrants disappear. A Guardian investigation into the Alexandria, Louisiana facility reveals a pattern of alleged due process violations. Unreported accounts of neglect and abuse, documented health emergencies, and long stays. And then there's a piece by ProPublica from last week. We found that more than 170 U.S. citizens have been held by immigration agents. They've been kicked, dragged, and detained for days. The Miami Herald found in late August, 2/3 of the 1,800 immigrants who were held in that Alligator Alcatraz jail in the Florida Everglades have gone missing from ICE's database. Families and attorneys have not been able to locate them. And several months back, we spoke with a car wash organizer in Los Angeles who said there were raids at many car washes and the same thing. Families had no idea where their loved ones were located. So given all of this, Catherine, can you also comment, how is this allowed to happen? And then you're in the Bay Area. What are you hearing from advocates and activists in San Francisco in case ICE agents do come to San Francisco?
Yeah, I don't know how it's being allowed to happen. I mean, we used to have sort of a structure of rights that we could explain to people, and those rights were generally respected. And we used to have a system that was predictable. If you're detained, or if someone's detained, we can find them on the detainee locator. But that doesn't seem to be working as quickly as it used to. People used to be able to go to court and process their case, or go to USCIS and have their interview and not have fear of being detained. And now people can be detained at those points also, even though it's just part of the process. And so the unpredictability, the randomness, and then the just overarching fear is really hard for people. And then now, yes, these rumors and statements from the administration and rumors that ICE is coming to San Francisco is for wide scale raids is very frightening. And the good news is we do have a lot of immigration legal services organizations that are ramping up and trying to get organized and trying to be prepared. We also are extremely grateful to the ACLU and all the other litigators that are filing the lawsuits to tell us that, we still do have rights and they can enforce them even though they're not being respected on the street.
Can you talk about what you're hearing from San Francisco officials? We put in a call to San Francisco Mayor Daniel Lurie's office to find out, are you in touch with the federal government? Will you be warned? Will they let you know? And we haven't heard back yet. So what are you hearing from officials?
We haven't heard from officials yet. We're just sort of hearing the rumor mill, that something is coming.
And what are you hearing from activists? I mean, given what you're already seeing in places like Chicago and many cities in the Los Angeles area, in New York, what are you hearing from activists and advocates about how they're preparing for this?
I mean, we're fortunate in the Bay Area. We do have, similar to a lot of other areas, a very strong rapid response network. And we have some organizations that really support those networks. So people are just trying to be ready and be on alert and, sort of do what they have been doing with all these sort of random detentions, and then figure out how we can scale it up if needed.
You also mentioned what is happening in courthouses. And Noreen, a lot of people are wondering, again, how this is legal. New York Magazine has a piece recently called "The Trap at 26 Federal Plaza." Everyday immigrants arriving for routine hearings are targeted by ICE agents and taken from their families. And photographers and videographers are there documenting this. And in many cases, you've got children screaming for their parents and they're being pushed away. And then a lot of people saw that really awful video of a woman, a mom, a wife, who was shoved to the ground by an ICE agent because her partner was taken and she was screaming. That agent was put on leave, but he's now back at work. So politicians have even been arrested at this courthouse standing up for immigrants. How is this legal?
The reality is that our immigration laws do provide really broad authorities in some cases for immigration agents and immigration enforcement. And there are things that no previous administration has tried to do that this administration is doing. And some of it just breaks with our sense of common decency. It also just breaks with common sense, because you want people to show up at immigration court if you want a functioning immigration system in this country. And if you want people to not live in the shadows, then you make immigration court a place that is safe for them to go to, safe for them to bring their children to. But if you want to sabotage a system in order to show that it really can't be saved, this is the kind of behavior that you engage in. You make it hard for people, impossible for people to safely comply with the rules and the systems that you put in place. And that is the very dangerous, cruel game that this administration is playing. It's playing it by design. They have an intention, which is to get people to hide and self-deport. And so when they tout those big deportation numbers and you look at them more closely, you see, well, they still only deported, they're even themselves only saying it's about 500,000 people that they themselves deported. And they're counting another 1.5 million people who they're gleeful that those people were so afraid. They're saying that they were so afraid that they left. The cruelty is not just the point of what they're doing day to day. It is the grand design. They want to get rid of 20 million people in this country. That's the number that the president campaigned on.
There are also a number of videos online from media outlets videotaping self-deportations. And this is parents who are leaving their children in this country, crying. I mean, they have no idea when they're going to be able to see them again. Let's talk a bit about these numbers, because millions of people voted for Donald Trump because of his immigration policies. I remember at the Republican National Committee, a number of Republicans were holding mass deportations now signs. So people support his policies. He said they were going to deport the, quote, worst of the worst. And I'm really surprised these numbers are not getting more attention. So I want to repeat this. Again, the Cato Institute got their hands on data from ICE that shows the government is primarily detaining individuals with no criminal convictions. 65% of people taken by ICE had no convictions at all, and 93% had no violent convictions. So that's 7% with violent convictions. Matthew, why aren't we hearing more about this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that there was an assumption propped up by political messaging that there is a massive underclass of specifically law-breaking immigrants in the country that just just does not exist. And so when you think about the promise to deport 20 million people, and also the promise to do that in a tailored and precise way, so to only get people who have broken the law and are the quote unquote worst of the worst, those two things are incompatible. You cannot deport 20 million people in any sort of precise way that only targets people who have broken the law. It's just not possible. And we're seeing that play out on the street with these so-called, as people are calling them, Kavanaugh stops, these stops that have been kind of made legal by the decision by the Supreme Court, which is that it is legal to stop people purely on the basis of their racial identity. And doing so is not likely to get you a specific class of criminal. It's likely to create an entire class of people who have been arrested, detained, or deported just because of their skin color.
And what are your thoughts on these numbers? Noreen, why do you think there's not more of a discussion about who's actually being detained?
Unfortunately, well, the Trump administration does talk about people as the worst of the worst. There is this sense that people who came to the country and who were no longer in legal status weren't playing by the rules. And so whatever happens to them, they had it coming. I mean, that is the not subtle undertone of what is happening. There's a certain lack of empathy, for individuals in those situations until those individuals end up being the ones who oh, I can't believe that they detained and deported the waitress who was my coworker or the student who sits alongside my son in his class. We see around the country communities fighting for people who were being taken from their communities, teenagers who no longer are at their high schools, or coworkers who are suddenly gone, people who are having to hide and leave behind their kids. We do see communities rising up. And so it's going to happen that way where people go beyond the administration's ugly rhetoric and they feel the impact themselves and they sense that injustice and they begin to push back. And I think for the first time in a very long time, we are at an inflection point on immigration where the country, many communities in this country are actually moving towards saying, this isn't the right kind of system. This isn't a system that serves us. It's not humane. It's not good for our economy. It doesn't make sense. And we want to see something better. And so much of the reason we are in this situation where we've got the administration, saying that it wants to go after millions and millions of our neighbors is because we never provided a path to citizenship for those people who are longstanding residents who came here and built a life and became part of our communities. And so hopefully when we come out of this wilderness that we are in, we come with a renewed sense of we have to get it done now. We have to change our laws so that people can be here and not have to live in constant fear of an ICE agent pulling them out of their homes.
And we'll talk more about that after a break. But before that, Catherine, what would you like to add about the data coming directly from ICE showing that 93% of the people that are being taken by ICE had no violent convictions?
That's definitely what we're seeing also. And not only that, but a lot of the people being taken entered lawfully. Under the last administration, one of the strategies to sort of control unlawful entries at the border or limit them was to allow people to be paroled in, allowed people to make an appointment to be screened by a CBP officer to see if they had a fear of return to their country. And if they did, then they'd be paroled in to seek asylum. And then also people were paroled in from certain countries and they were able to come here, seek asylum or seek temporary protected status. And this administration is canceling all of those parole statuses. They're canceling the temporary protected status and making people who did enter lawfully to seek asylum lawfully are being turned into detainable people, and it's just really sad.
And before we go to break, Matthew, you mentioned the Supreme Court decision, and I wanted to ask you more about this. Vox has a piece called "How the Supreme Court Placed ICE Above the Law," and Ian Millhiser writes, "The Supreme Court, or at least 6 Republicans, appears to be on board with these ICE tactics. In September, the Republican justices voted to block a lower court order that, among other things, forbade ICE from targeting suspected undocumented immigrants solely because of their race. The Republican justices rarely explain their decisions when they rule in Trump's favor, but Justice Kavanaugh did write a concurring opinion explaining why he voted the way he did. His assertion that someone targeted by ICE's, quote, apparent ethnicity was relevant to law enforcement deciding whom to stop has received the most attention, as Kavanaugh seemed to blow off fears that federal law enforcement is targeting Latinos because of their race. Kavanaugh strongly implied no one victimized by ICE may seek an injunction prohibiting ICE from engaging in illegal tactics in the future." So can you talk about the significance of the Supreme Court decision?
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, judges and courts have ruled that police can't stop people on the basis of race, and this has been, the subject of a lot of civil rights activism over many, many years. And so what we've seen now is a real attempt to put ICE above the law and to legally sanction their racial profiling. And this is something that, has been a de facto way of life for many people, especially if you live along the US-Mexico border, that, people are profiled based on their race. But now to make it an official and sanctioned part of immigration enforcement and a part of the country in general is a really dark step forward.
Well, we're going to take a quick break. On today's Your Call, we continue our series, The Authoritarian Playbook, by discussing the Trump administration's mass deportations, violent ICE raids, and due process violations. We'll also talk about ICE expanding its surveillance capabilities, and then we're also talking about Trump's threats to send ICE to San Francisco. If you have any questions, if you are living in a community where you have seen ICE agents, we'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts about Trump threatening to send ICE to San Francisco? If you have any comments about some of the videos that you've been seeing, you can give us a call at 866-798-8255. You can also email your call at kalw.org. And if you or someone you know voted for Trump because of immigration, what are you hearing from them about how they are carrying this out? Today, we're joined by Dr. Matthew Guaraglia, Senior Policy Analyst at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Noreen Shaw, Director of Government Affairs in the Equality Division at the ACLU, and Catherine Seitz, Legal Director for the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area. This is Your Call. We'll be back after this. This is Your Call. I'm Rose Aguilar. Today, we continue our series, The Authoritarian Playbook, by discussing the Trump administration's mass deportation policies. And just to reiterate these numbers, because I'm just not really hearing them in much media coverage, the Department of Homeland Security says 2 million undocumented people have been deported or have self-deported since January 20th. Over 59,000 people are in ICE detention. The Cato Institute got their hands on ICE data that found the government is primarily detaining people with no criminal convictions of any kind. 65% of people taken by ICE had no convictions. 93% had no violent convictions. If you'd like to join us, the toll-free number is 866-798-8255. You can also email your call at kalw.org. Today, we're joined by Dr. Matthew Guaraglia, Senior Policy Analyst at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, author of Police and the Empire City, and the forthcoming book, The Church Committee Report, Revelations from the Bombshell 1970s Investigation into the National Security State. Noreen Shaw is Director of Government Affairs and the Equality Division at the ACLU. Catherine Seitz is Legal Director for the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area. Noreen, the Supreme Court case we were just talking about is an ACLU and partners case. So can you tell us more about the significance of that decision and the precedent it sets?
Yeah, thank you so much. The Vasquez-Perdomo case is one where we and our partners challenged ICE and DHS's practice in Los Angeles that relied on a bunch of different factors: race and ethnicity, speaking Spanish or English with an accent. And they did that to detain people without individualized suspicion. And while the district court in that case found those practices likely unconstitutional, what the Supreme Court did on its so-called shadow docket, meaning without a full briefing and without oral argument, they stayed the injunction that the district court had issued. And effectively, that allows ICE to resume using those profiling-based stops while the litigation continues. Now, it's important to note that the Supreme Court didn't issue a full opinion. The Kavanaugh concurrence, Justice Kavanaugh's concurrence that we have been talking about was certainly really alarming, but it is not the decision, it is not the majority opinion. And so where things are now is that ICE isn't constrained by the lower court's order because it's been stayed, and it's possible that an individual stop could still be challenged in court for constitutional reasons. So we still have protections. ICE agents may now believe that they can carry out stops like this without concern or with less concern about facing legal consequences. But the reality is that Perdomo is a procedural stay. It's not a decision on the merits, and this litigation is going to continue. And we continue to push back against the misuse of this case, the Perdomo decision, to justify discriminatory profiling by police.
We have an email from Art who writes, if anyone representing the federal government, whether ICE or the National Guard, arrests or detains anyone based on their skin color, based on the mere suspicion that they may be undocumented in San Francisco, would it be appropriate for the San Francisco DA or the state California Attorney General to file a class action lawsuit if more than one person is arrested or detained in San Francisco? Noreen, what are your thoughts?
We absolutely want to see state and local officials take a stand for our rights and protecting us under the Constitution. And there have been important legal actions brought by the state of California, by individual attorneys general all over the country to vindicate our rights. And I think they send a really important message to the federal government that we won't be cowed, that we won't be intimidated. And what I hope also is that for an individual ICE officer or Border Patrol officer who's considering their actions, they cause them to pause and think through whether they really are immune from prosecution, whether they really will get away with the things that they are doing. And of course, we don't think that they are, and we don't think that they should get away and will get away with it. And so it's important that every legal action that we're seeing filed continues, because they do send that message to individual ICE and CBP officers and the other federal law enforcement officers who are taking part in these escalations of immigration raids.
Thank you for the email, Art. Ellen writes, what are nonprofit legal service organizations doing to reassure and protect immigrants during this time? Catherine?
Yeah, thank you. We're trying to be responsive to our clients, to do a lot of outreach. We do sort of know your rights presentations. We try to keep our website up to date with information, and are just telling people that that they do have rights, but if those rights are violated, there might be remedies. What we're seeing in the Bay Area lately and elsewhere is that when people are detained, there is no longer, for most people, there's no longer a right to have an immigration judge give you a bond hearing and release you on bond because of some Department of Justice opinions that came out recently. And so what we're seeing is that immigration lawyers are now going, who are used to going just to immigration court or to USCIS, are now going into federal court and filing habeas petitions and are winning those and are getting people released using habeas corpus petitions.
Well, thank you for that email, and we are definitely going to be monitoring this just to find out if they're going to carry through with their threat to send ICE agents to San Francisco. Let's go to Ellen in San Francisco. Hi, Ellen. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you for the show. And I'm just wondering, thank you to the ACLU and to nonprofits and everyone that's working on this issue and trying to protect immigrants. I'm wondering, for people who are just community members, is there anything we can do, especially at a time when there are threats, that the ICE is coming to San Francisco? Is there anything that we can do to fight back?
Thank you, Ellen. Catherine, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I remember when I saw the video of the in San Diego of the Italian restaurant that got raided, and just seeing the immediate response of neighbors and community members being so outraged and yelling at ICE and telling them to leave those people alone and to go away, just made me tear up at the time, because it's really great to see people, just regular people in the community, defending our immigrant neighbors. And so I think that's really important, is to keep speaking up, to protest peacefully, but to protest and to reach out to your elected officials and push them to also speak up. And I think in California and in the Bay Area in particular, we have a lot of officials that are willing to speak up and are willing to defend our community. So I think we just have to keep at it and not stay silent.
Noreen, what rights do people have when they're out on the streets?
It's a big question, and the thing that I would encourage all your listeners to do is look at the Know Your Rights training materials that have been put together by many organizations. For the ACLU, if you just Google ACLU Know Your Rights, you'll come to a landing page that has information about your rights in the context of, you're at the airport, you encounter law enforcement, you encounter military troops. If you're a person who is a non-citizen, if you're out to protest, the most important thing is, of course, your safety and thinking about how to keep you and your loved ones safe. But then as you're thinking about the different ways to get involved in pushing back, we have trainings. There's trainings that will be ongoing, that are live. There are webinars that you can watch for trainings that have already happened. But it is vital that people understand what they can and cannot do, and how to be safe if they are going to engage in protests. And I also want to encourage your listeners to look at the ways that they can get involved and push back on the kinds of rights violations we're seeing, whether it's engaging with your members of Congress or your state and local elected officials. There are so many ways, and it is going to take all of us to get out of this bleak moment that we're in. We need as many people as we can to be in a sustained fight for our rights. And the ACLU has a ton of resources on this. If you Google ACLU People Power, you will find many of them, and really appreciate the work of local organizations as well, and the important resources that they provide and ways for people to get involved in a very direct way to protect and support their communities.
Matthew, you focus on government surveillance at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. You've written books about modern police technology. What kinds of tools and technologies are being used to track people on the streets?
Yeah, it's quite a lot. I do want to emphasize that, a lot of what we've seen on the ground is relatively low tech, that, police are kind of focusing on the kind of racial terror element of this, and they are looking for people, based on, as Noreen said, language, on skin color, perceived race and ethnicity. That being said, despite how kind of low tech we see the policing on the ground being, that ICE and the Department of Homeland Security generally are amassing a tremendously large surveillance apparatus, which brings together information from a lot of different sources, commercial entities, different branches of government, and also local police. So I think one thing I'd like to make clear for Bay Area listeners and San Francisco listeners in particular is San Francisco has invested a lot of both public money and private individual millions of private individual monies from rich donors into building out a massive surveillance apparatus in the city that come the time when ICE gets interested in surveilling the city and surveilling immigrants in the city, that might become useful to them. And so talking to the Board of Supervisors now and trying to build up as much of a firewall as you can to make sure that data from local police devices don't wind up in the hands of ICE, even if that means having to deactivate or turn off some of this equipment, is right at the front of what people, I think, should be doing in San Francisco.
For people who have not been following this, can you elaborate? You wrote a piece last month with Josh Richman. San Francisco gets an invasive billionaire bot surveillance HQ. So let us know what do we need to know about what's happening in San Francisco and surveillance?
So San Francisco has one cryptocurrency billionaire, Chris Larson, who has given $9 million to the city to found what is called a real-time investigation center, which is a high-tech headquarters where all of the surveillance being collected by the city is routed to one centralized location. And so from there, you can watch cars as they travel along the roads on one of 400 license plate readers that San Francisco has recently purchased. You can look at drone footage. They can tap into historically hundreds of cameras in semi-public business improvement district and commercial benefit district camera networks. So just the city is now almost entirely blanketed in surveillance. And my real fear is not only that the SFPD is going to use this for a style of policing which is going to hurt already marginalized policing, but it is also going to be a real desirable thing for ICE and the Department of Homeland Security to tap into when or if they arrive in the city.
I mean, we're seeing mass surveillance in some other countries. I was just watching a video about cameras in so many places in big cities in China, for example. What would you say to people who argue that these cameras are needed to prevent and deter crime?
I mean, I would say that safety and privacy are not mutually exclusive. We do not have to choose one or the other. I think that is a false choice that has been given to us. That $9 million the city just accepted from a very wealthy person to put exclusively into surveillance. That money could have been put into other things that studies have shown are actually more effective at lowering crime rates citywide than surveillance. Things like public housing, public health, public infrastructure, social safety net programs. Things like that are actually more sustainable at lowering crime rates than just putting up a lot of cameras. Because as we know, because we've all seen a lot of footage of crime, cameras don't prevent crime. People don't really generally see cameras and not commit crime. And so what we have is a false choice where people in San Francisco are being told you can choose safety or you can choose privacy. But I think it's absolutely a false choice. And what we see with, both immigration enforcement and in a post-Dobbs in enforcing abortion across state lines is that all the surveillance equipment that police are putting up and justifying it by saying they're going to exclusively fight the most violent criminals or the most, find the most violent immigrants or what have you, are really being used in ways that go far beyond the scope of how they were initially justified.
And we should say there's a lot of money that is being spent on ICE and the surveillance apparatus. The Republican budget bill gave ICE $170 billion. Axios reports that new surveillance spending includes a contract with Clearview AI, which provides a facial recognition algorithm, a multi-million-dollar contract with B1-2 for its biometric data system, Iris, which, quote, promises a real-time ID of a person after taking a photo of their eye, according to the company website. A restarted contract with Paragon Solutions. They provide software that can remotely access smartphone data. As the Washington Post reported, the Biden administration banned Paragon as an unethical spyware company. Matthew, what else do we need to know about the surveillance apparatus that's being built?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I think people need to realize that there are kind of like three amorphous and underregulated clouds that I imagine that ICE is getting data from based on this infrastructure they're building out. One is, their own surveillance infrastructure, the technologies, the companies they contract with, and that includes, things that they have access to by virtue of being part of the Department of Homeland Security. So all of the larger counterterrorism apparatus that they have built up over the last 20 years. One is the local police infrastructure like Flock Safety, which creates these automated license plate readers that there are, over 80,000 of in the country, and which sympathetic police departments to ICE have been allowing ICE to query license plates across the country and find where they're headed using this kind of local police infrastructure. And the last one is commercial data. And so, there's been some reporting that there are these entities called data brokers. And what they do is they buy information from smartphone apps that want to make a little bit of extra money by packaging and selling your data, including your geolocation, including where your phone is at any given time. And who they usually sell this data to is like advertisers, so that you get ads for, restaurants or stores near you geographically. But increasingly, people are using this for surveillance. So, either companies are buying and packaging it and mapping that for the government, or the government is buying that data directly. But there's been a lot of reporting that ICE and the Department of Homeland Security has been buying like tens of millions of geolocation data points from people's phones and mapping it based on this commercially available data.
Dr. Matthew Guaraglia is Senior Policy Analyst at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Noreen Shaw is Director of Government Affairs and the Equality Division at the ACLU. Catherine Seitz is Legal Director for the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area. We're getting a lot more emails from listeners who just want to know What can we do, especially if ICE comes to San Francisco? And I want to play a clip from the No Kings rally on Saturday in Chicago. Again, we should say that according to organizers, 7 million people came out in all 50 states. Some are saying it was the largest protest we've ever seen in this country. So here is Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson calling for a general strike at Saturday's No Kings rally in Chicago. That rally, the march, went on for 2 miles. Organizers say 300,000 people took to the streets in Chicago.
Donald Trump is using ICE as his private, militarized, occupying force. The only other entities that are funded greater than ICE are the United States military and China's military. But we are saying emphatically clear, we do not want troops in our city. We will not allow our cities to be occupied. So here's what we need to do in this moment. If my ancestors as slaves can lead the greatest general strike in the history of this country, taking it to the ultra-rich and big corporations, we can do the same today.
Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson calling for a general strike at Saturday's No Kings rally in Chicago. Catherine, Johnson, that got a lot of attention. A lot of people are saying that a general strike is needed to respond to all of this. What are you hearing from community activists about, a lot of people are asking, what is most effective right now?
I think what can be most effective in terms of protest is the presence on the street, the people who sign up with rapid response networks or Bay Resistance or other groups to go when there's an ICE activity or a report of ICE activity, to go and witness and film and speak out. I think that's really effective. I think we saw that in Los Angeles, that people were very organized and they were responding really rapidly anytime there was reports of ICE activity. And I think that can be replicated here and can be very protective and can also send the message to the immigrant community that they're supported, that their neighbors support them and care about them.
Noreen, what would you add?
This time that we're living in is so hard. I think every day I'm reading the news headlines and watching the stories on Instagram, and it is those stirring words from the mayor of Chicago that give me a lot of hope about people pushing back and finding ways to kind of dig in and get ready for a fight that is for the long haul, because we have years and years of this administration remaining, and it is going to take a sustained movement to get us out of this wilderness that we're in.
When you talk about 3 more years of this, do you think they're just going to continue this in other cities? What do you think is to come?
I absolutely think we're going to see a drumbeat of deployments and escalations in cities across the country. The administration's game plan, and we should be clear-eyed about it, is to sow civil unrest and thereby justify their deployment of more federal law enforcement, more troops, and creating this kind of national paramilitary policing force that involves federal law enforcement, state and local police in some parts of the country, and potentially the military. And their game plan is to consolidate President Trump's power and to silence their critics and to make people afraid to dissent. And so they will continue the deployments, and we'll continue to hear these rumors that will become realities in the coming months and years. And they will continue to do it as long as they can get away with it, politically speaking, meaning the more that they get their political allies in the Republican Party to go along with it, the more people who have the option to say something decide to say nothing. That is what will enable them to continue. And I expect that they'll just take it to the extremes of what they can do So it is a steady drumbeat, and we should be ready for it. We should be clear-eyed about it. It's not alarmist to say that it's going to continue. It's just rational. They have power and they are using it, and we can fight back. There is a way out of it. We've seen this kind of thing happen in countries all over the world. We've seen it happen throughout history, and we know the way out is through peaceful, nonviolent, sustained protest movements. That's how we'll get through it.
Matthew, your final thoughts. What do you expect over the next 3 years, and what do you think is most effective in response? And we have about a minute left.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly echo. I think we need a sustained social and protest movement, which focuses on building power starting at the very bottom, starting at local and municipal elections, because ultimately a lot of the people who the surveillance they encounter in their daily lives are put up by local police departments. And so I think focusing on thinking about, data security, thinking about protecting your communities from federal surveillance, from civil rights violations, that begins with a sustained movement at the local level and then works its way up. I expect that we're going to see a lot more of this consolidation of information of all of these different places of gathering information. And the question is what the Trump administration plans to do with it. I mean, I think definitely they are trying to make people afraid. They are trying to go after critics, and they're going to eventually use all this information, I think, especially social media surveillance, as we've been seeing increasingly, to silence critics. And so I think thinking about policies that are going to protect our data, thinking about surveillance self-defense, and EFF has a number of specific and tailored guides for people on our surveillance self-defense guidelines that people can look at. And so I think we're going to have to think about how technology has a role to play in this movement, and making sure that we don't forget about the kind of digital and technological infrastructure of the authoritarianism that is consolidating.
Dr. Matthew Guariglia is Senior Policy Analyst at the EFF. Noreen Shaw is with the ACLU. Catherine Seitz is with the Immigration Institute of the Bay Area. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for joining us. I'm Rose Aguilar. It's your call.